It turns out that getting studio lighting to not be as blue as a spaceship scene on The Expanse is rather difficult, and yet, we're still here with another tier list. My name is Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman, and welcome back to the channel.
Metal Slug Tactics.
Hello everyone, if you enjoy what I do, including character analysis for newly released turn-based strategy RPGs such as Metal Slug Tactics, then a like on this video, a subscription to the channel, and potential consideration for checking out my YouTube memberships or my Patreon would be very much appreciated. People who directly support my YouTube memberships and my Patreon absolutely help more than I think y'all realize. Ad rev goes up and down, but always being able to rely on the direct support from you guys makes it so much easier to keep this channel going. So if you want to check that out, you will eternally earn my gratitude, and you'll show up at the end of videos just like this one. So hey, not too bad of a deal, right? So what is the idea today? Today, I've spent, as of this recording, I think 35, 40 hours in Metal Slug Tactics, and I feel like I have a pretty good grasp on all of the available characters, plus or minus some potential secret characters that I'm still convinced are in the game, and I wanted to go through and rate them compared to each other, so that people who are getting into the game or maybe have been just starting to get a grasp of what characters have on offer can get a little bit of a better understanding of what they're getting into and who they might want to use. So we're going to go through a fairly standard tier list format. There's a couple of little discrepancies that I've set up that we'll discuss, and I'm probably going to have some more in-depth character overviews going forward, but this is my current understanding of how all of the characters in MST tend to work. We're going to go through from Marco to Trevor with everyone in between, and just kind of discuss where I feel that they fall. So with that said, let's talk about our tiers here. You'll see I still have everything broken down by a standard S, A, B, C, D tier list format, but with a little bit of extra context in the tiers themselves. S tier is self-sufficient, A tier is adaptable, B tier is baseline, C tier is corner case, and D tier is desynced. Let's go through what those mean really quick, just so y'all know what the rules of engagement are here. Self-sufficient is pretty much what it says on the tin. Characters that, no matter what team you're using them in, no matter what environment you're using them in, no matter what the context is, they're generally going to be able to perform very well, regardless of what other teammates you have with them. These are just very strong characters, and generally, in terms of Metal Slug Tactics, going to be good no matter what. Because, let's be honest, there's no bad characters in Metal Slug Tactics. It's a very well-balanced game. But there are definitely some that I feel perform better in a more universal sense than others, and that's what this tier is here to denote. The adaptable tier is similar to self-sufficient, but oftentimes has maybe a little bit more reliance on what terrain you're in, what difficulty you're on, what other teammates you have available to support these characters, that type of thing. They're generally going to be very, very strong no matter what, but maybe not so universally applicable as the self-sufficient tier. Your baseline tier, this is your middle of the road. These are characters that are going to be pretty solid no matter what team you put them on. They're maybe not the most optimized characters. Maybe they don't have the best weapon loadouts or the best skills for extremely focused, powerful builds, but generally speaking are going to be good no matter what team you put them on. Your corner cases are going to be characters that can be extremely powerful in specific circumstances, specific difficulties, specific terrain, specific team setups, but outside of those setups, maybe underperform much more. Maybe they've got some anti-synergy. Maybe they just don't quite have the punch that you need them to, or the overall ability utility that you would like them to. That's where these characters are going to go. Finally, we have the desynced tier, and there's probably, based on my own initial feelings, probably going to be one character that's going to go here, but desynced is basically going to be a character that can function, but beyond just not having great synergy with all of the characters in the game, doesn't even quite have synergy with themselves. So not the best place to be. Still functional, of course, but in terms of comparison to the other characters in the game, not the best. Not the best. So with that description of the tiers out of the way, let's start talking about these 9 characters. I imagine this will probably be a little bit of a shorter episode. So first off, we have the initial main character of Metal Slug, Marco. And as the main character, he's going to fall squarely into the baseline tier. And I feel like that's appropriate. The thing with Marco is he's very much a support character. He is a character that wants to be giving allies extra attacks. He wants to be providing extra hits for their shots. He wants to be maybe refunding his own abilities so he can support his allies better. And then maybe being able to manipulate the terrain or vehicles in a way that will be beneficial to the team when those options exist, but those options don't always exist, and that's going to have a major impact on how good he is. As a result, Marco is very solid. He's never a bad choice to have, but he's very reliant on the teammates that he has around him and what the terrain that he's navigating through offers him. There have definitely been times where Marco can really shine for me. He can provide a bunch of extra attacks with Marco Salvo. He can use Alice activation to man vehicles or activate terrain features that I don't otherwise have like the movement or action economy to really work into my overall battle plan. And he can be very strong if you can get good abilities on him over the course of a run. But at baseline and in general, he's never going to be your powerhouse unit. His shots are fine. At base, he has his pistol and his heavy machine gun. Otherwise, he tends to feature sync attack bonus weapons and skills and things that need a good team to back them up and can be really strong if you have that. But if you don't, Marco tends to kind of just be fine. Again, it never hurts to have him, getting some extra shots, being able to mess with some terrain features. That's not bad, ever. You will find uses for it throughout a run, but it's never going to be the end-all, be-all, I'm so happy I brought him type of build. Now, moving on to Tarma. Tarma, I think, is our first corner case, and it's a real shame because at his peak, Tarma can be really, really strong. The problem with Tarma is he's a little too all-in glass cannon for my tastes, and I don't think it really synergizes with what you can kind of do with other characters as you unlock them. So let me explain. The whole idea behind Tarma is he wants to be in, and he wants to be in hard. He wants to ride his bike in, hit a bunch of enemies, get a bunch of dodge, tank a bunch of hits, maybe hit some people in melee or using a shotgun, and generally not be worried too much about the hits that he's going to be taking so long as he can deal damage in return, right? He's got laser weapons, he's got flame weapons, he's got explosives, he's got shotguns, melee weapons, all that type of fun stuff. And it feels really good to use in the moment because it does feel like he has a lot of damage output. The problem is that Metal Slug Tactics is very much a team synergy based game. And Tarma, in my experience, has not really been a team synergy based character. Now, that's not to say that you can't do anything with Tarma, right? His ability to jump down, hit a big AoE group of enemies, provoke them to hit him instead of other targets, or plow through a group of targets with his motorcycle and get a bunch of dodge, or be able to move a particular high value target and potentially kill them, get a bonus action. There's a lot that Tarma can do, but it all largely relies on the terrain that you have available and what types of enemies that you're facing. If you're in a situation where you really can't rely on being able to have straight line targeting for a lot of his abilities, or perhaps you just don't have the opportunity to land amongst a large group of enemies, or maybe you don't care if you have a bunch of enemies that are going to suddenly be switching their target from something else, like a guest character or your other party members, to Tarma with all of his dodge, his usefulness drops off very quickly. He doesn't have huge damage output or huge bonus actions compared to other characters, and Metal Slug Tactics is a game that doesn't really favor extreme tankiness as much as other turn-based strategy RPGs. So, in certain scenarios, Tarma can be phenomenal. I've had great times using him on certain teams, but there's also been other times where his penchant for dealing AoE damage that you really don't want on your team, potentially, or just because of positioning, or the fact that he needs certain terrain features to make the most of his abilities, make him very anti-synergistic in a lot of scenarios that can make him hard to use. So I think that puts him squarely in corner case. Now, continuing on with our classic Metal Slug characters, we have Eri, and I think Eri is solidly adaptable. I initially didn't feel super strong about Eri during the initial demo release period when the initial Metal Slug cast plus Tarma were the only characters that were in the game before we saw the other characters that were going to be released. She felt like the weakest of the cast, but now seeing what abilities we have, what movement abilities we have, the density of enemy characters, etc., etc., I appreciate Eri far more for her overall versatility. The idea behind Eri is that while her initial damage output might be lower than the other characters, AoE is incredibly valuable and movement is incredibly valuable. That alone means that Eri can slot pretty comfortably into any given team, whether it just be triggering a bunch of sync attacks because of AoE abilities, or getting bonus movement, or just range in general to move around, get dodge, get in position to trigger extra attacks on other enemies, also really strong. Or even just her ability to say, like, hey, I'm going to rocket jump, hit a bunch of guys over here and a bunch of guys over there. There's a lot of damage potential there, especially against bosses as well. Eri has a lot of versatility, and I've found that pretty much every single time that I've had her on a team, I've been happy to have her there. I don't have as many runs under my belt with Eri as I would potentially like, but even with the runs that I have, I can see that I'm pretty much always going to be happy with her. She's a fairly simple character. She doesn't need as much setup or as much kind of maneuvering as other characters in the cast might, but I think that's a point in her favor. She's just really strong in general. She's got a lot of versatility, and you have a number of different good builds that you can do with her, especially with her different weapon outlooks. So I think overall, definitely A tier for Eri. Fio, she's self-sufficient tier. She is our first S tier character. Now the reason for this is because Fio has two very clear-cut build paths, and both of them are very strong regardless of what teams that you're bringing along. First off is kind of the kill spree tier, as I'm calling it. It's the kill spree build that features a lot of chained kills, sync kills, bonus actions, bonus moves, stacking extra damage with kills that Fio shares with one other character who we'll talk about later. And then her other build path is sort of the medic support path, where she can reduce damage taken, negate damage taken entirely, move allies around to put them in position for sync attacks, give HP directly, like in a direct medic role. She's very versatile. And that means that no matter what team that you're putting Fio on, there's going to be a role for her to fill when other characters maybe don't quite have that availability in terms of what weapons they have and what skills they have. Now, for me, Fio has absolutely shined as a raw damage dealer. She has the kill spree build, where every time she gets a kill, or every time she's involved in a kill, her damage for that turn increases by 1. And with sync attacks, AoE damage, bonus actions, bonus moves, you can stack up a lot of extra damage very quickly. It is not unheard of for me to be using Fio Classic with her normal pistol and heavy machine gun build, and have her pistol be dealing 6 or 7 damage per shot when it starts at 3. That is insane. That is so strong in every difficulty that I've played thus far in Metal Slug Tactics, and I've played all but the highest difficulty thus far. Fio is always a good option to have. Combine that with the fact that she can get bonus moves and bonus actions, shift herself or allies around, be supporting if you need her to, while also getting extra damage, things like overheat to get like direct kills, and then also get bonus actions off of that to get more kills, which stacks her kill spree, which gives her more damage. It can get absolutely nuts. I didn't expect Fio to be one of the opportune damage dealers in the game, but she absolutely is, bar none. And I think that means that she squarely belongs in the self-sufficient tier, because damage is king in most tactics games, and that is no different in Metal Slug Tactics. Next up, we have Clark, and this is where we start to get into the Akari Warriors, who are actually some of my favorite characters in the game. I have a lot of positives about the next 3 characters. Clark, however, tends to be the lowest of the 3, and I think he belongs squarely alongside Marco in the baseline tier. Clark is very similar to Marco in a lot of ways. He has decent damage output. He's actually a little bit better at damage than Marco is at baseline, but he really kind of focuses more on supporting his team and making the most of what they're capable of, rather than being a direct damage dealer himself. Granted, he has skills like his Argentine Backbreaker, where he can deal a bunch of damage to an enemy, potentially get some bonus actions, bonus moves, depending on what skills you have unlocked, but it's not going to be his focus. Every time that I've used Clark, he's been the best at setting up extra sync attacks, getting stacking damage bonuses or other types of bonuses on other characters by allowing more sync attacks, more damage, more positioning, rather than being the damage dealer himself. That means that he's great in pretty much any team setup that I've used him in thus far. But if he doesn't have a good team setup to go with him, if he doesn't have damage dealers or more focused, specialized characters that need extra support to get the max out of their bonus actions and bonus movements, then he's not going to do as well. If he is in a team like that, then he's going to do very, very well, but he's never going to be the focus. So I think he resides very strongly at baseline. Now, for my favorite of the Ikari Warriors. This man, this absolute Giga Chad, fire punching, dashing across the arena, destroying everything without even needing to use a gun, man, this is Ralf, and he is going to be our other self-sufficient character alongside Fio. Holy shit, man. Ralf is insane. Ralf cares about one thing, and that is dealing damage. A lot of damage. He wants to get in there, he wants to punch someone, he wants to be in the middle of the enemy formation, he wants to get bonus actions and bonus moves, and just keep going. If the whole point of Metal Slug Tactics is run and gun, keep moving, keep gaining adrenaline, keep gaining dodge, even if you're in the middle of the formation, be moving so fast and have so much adrenaline built up that you're just dodging every single attack that's coming your way, while also somehow inexplicably hitting all of the enemies around you, Ralf is the epitome of that. The two big features of Ralf's loadout, as far as I'm concerned, are Dynamite Punch and Galactica Phantom. They are absolutely my favorite abilities in the game, and they have two different big features that make them such core aspects of Ralf's loadout. Dynamite Punch is a ranged damage ability, where if you get a kill with it, it refunds an action to Ralf, and he can continue using Dynamite Punch or other actions, so long as he has the adrenaline to do so. This very easily stacks up to chain 4, 5, 6 kills across the enemy party because it's a ranged ability, and the fact that it starts at a pretty high damage point and only gets higher as you stack up kills if you have the relevant skills on Ralf means you can very easily clear large groups of enemies. Now, as far as Galactica Phantom is concerned, this is a huge damage dealer in terms of single target damage, and as such, it's one of my big openers on bosses. Basically, what it does is it takes all of the dodge that Ralf has built up, and he has a lot of different ways to build dodge, and applies it to his damage in one big burst. Now, what's insane about this is the fact that it actually applies in a line, and every enemy in that line, it takes that damage up to the maximum distance range of the ability. I've cleared 3, 4, 5 enemies and hit the boss if they all line up, and destroyed all of them with one attack for a relatively low adrenaline cost. Ralf is just kind of insane like that. Combine that with the fact that you can get extra damage from killing tally off of sync attacks, bonus actions, that type of thing, and Ralf can very quickly spiral out of control to be the single biggest damage dealer in the game. As a result, no matter what team that you're running, he is always, and I mean always, going to find a slot. There's going to be times where he's more or less efficient, depending on what support that he has. Sure, I get that. But at baseline, with the skills that he has, he's always going to be able to find a build where he can just crush things, and you're always going to be happy to have it. I was very skeptical of Ralf as a character at first, but now that I've had a lot of time with him and I've used him on a bunch of different teams, he's easily one of my favorite includes, and I have had to physically stop myself from including him in teams so that I can learn more about other characters and how they're able to function without what is potentially the best character in the game just clearing maps for them. Next up, we have Leona. I think Leona is solidly A tier. Now, I've actually had the opportunity to speak with some of the devs who've worked on the game who spoke very highly of Leona, and I would agree with them. The big thing with Leona is she wants the opportunity to be able to sort of be the front runner for a team. And that's because every time she gets a kill or she's involved in a kill, she'll create a clone that can then sync attack to provide extra damage against other enemies on the battlefield. What this means for you is you need to be very good at setting up sync attacks and positioning Leona well so that she can be involved in as many kills as possible, while also making it so that you're optimizing the turn order that you have so that she's going early enough that she's able to set up a bunch of clones to deal more damage with other characters who are attacking enemies that are within range of said clones as you go through the campaign. Now, of course, there are abilities that you're able to unlock or earn on Leona that will make either the range of the clones bigger, make it so that they hit everything in their radius, make it so you can get more per turn, etc., etc. But if you're not making the most of Leona's clones, you're not using her right. Now, that said, it's not that hard to make the best of Leona's clones. So long as you have an understanding of how sync attack works and how you can kind of position the members of your army to maximize your damage output, you'll find that you're spawning more clones than you would almost expect to be able to spawn every turn. You won't always be able to make the most of each of those clones, but having them available is definitely very, very strong. Now, the thing that holds Leona back from self-sufficient is the fact that a lot of her weapon loadouts do want more specific team setups and overall ideologies in terms of combat. She has a lot of AoE, she has a lot of flame usage, she has a lot of sync attack setup, get a bunch of clones type of things, and not every character with every weapon loadout is going to work with that. Leona does want support. She's not reliant on it, but she does want it, so she doesn't quite reach the same level as Fio and Ralf do. She is still incredibly strong. I'm always happy to have her on a team, but whenever I do include her, I kind of tend to find myself leaning towards making a team that can support Leona rather than Leona being a supporting or helpful member of the team, if that makes sense. Finally, we have our last two characters here, characters that I was not expecting to find in the game and didn't even realize would be in the game until the full release happened, Nadia and Trevor. And unfortunately for Nadia, she is going to be our first and only D-tier desynced character. Now again, let me remind you, for any Nadia fans out there, D-tier is not directly stating that a character is bad, right? Every character in Metal Slug Tactics is very much usable. The issue with Nadia, and the reason that I've described D-tier as desynced, is she has two very clear build paths that you can build into and that definitely do work, but that really don't feel like they synergize with each other, and as such want very different build paths in terms of Nadia's teammates. And that is not something you're always going to be able to accommodate. So, how does Nadia work? The idea is that she has two different things she wants to do. She either wants to lean into her robots, either like the gun bot that can set up extra sync attacks and set down extra mines for her, self-destruct, deal damage to enemies, or the gun lizard or whatever it is, that is like a little bomb on wheels essentially that you can then navigate around and blow up to deal a bunch of damage to enemies, potentially get bonus explosions with it, things like that. She has a lot of potential damage output there. The other aspect of what Nadia wants to do is really manipulating her Tesla mines, getting extra mines that she can set down, standing on top of mines that her special weapon doesn't use ammo, getting bonus effects for standing on mines, or potentially pulling enemies into mines or moving mines to enemies to be able to sort of manipulate that terrain-based warfare that really isn't present on other characters in the game. And as such, I really enjoy it. I think it's really cool. I love being able to put down a bunch of mines, move them around, limit where my enemies are able to move, punish the enemy if they move into positions that they shouldn't be in, and they take a mine explosion or maybe get stunned or have some other negative effect that happens to them depending on what build you have. But unfortunately, the bots and the mines don't really synergize very well. It's very clear when you take Nadia, you want to lean into one build or the other. And while there can be some overlap, every time I've used her, I've always felt bad if I don't lean very heavily into one side or the other. The additional problem with that is, like, say you're using the bots build, right? You really want to be leaning into using as many sync attacks as possible. So you want things like Marco and Eri. Whereas if you're leaning into maybe the mines, you want stuff that'll be able to lean into a lot of positioning, like, say, Ralf and Tarma. And if you don't have those abilities, you don't have those skills available to you, you're going to feel like you're not getting the most out of Nadia that you feel like you should be able to. Compare that to a lot of other characters that can find slots to lean into. She definitely feels like the weakest of the bunch. And again, that's not to say that I haven't had great success with Nadia. I've used all of these characters in successful runs on various different difficulties. But of the entire cast, she is always the one that has felt like I've needed to put the most focus into her to make her useful, as opposed to other higher tier characters like Eri, Theo, Ralf, that enable builds. They don't require builds. And that's a pretty big difference maker, especially as you get up to higher difficulties. Now finally we have Trevor, and I think Trevor kind of falls into corner case with Tarma, which is making for a pretty solid list, all things considered. I don't think I'm going to have to really rearrange this by the end, but the whole idea behind Trevor is that he wants to get a lot of maneuverability melee damage in, while also doing some mind control shenanigans and not letting enemies hit you while making them hit each other. And that is strong. But the thing to consider with Metal Slug Tactics is that turn order manipulation is not as important here as it is in things like Into the Breach, right? The player has too much power with different attacks, different abilities, stacking damage, bonus actions, bonus movements, to need to worry so much about manipulating where enemies are going to be and what they're going to hit, compared to things like Into the Breach that MST clearly takes a lot of inspiration from. That means that this half, I would say, of Trevor's build is not as important as it could be. Now, that said, if you really want to lean into the repositioning and mind control aspect, Trevor can be really, really nasty. Being able to ensure that 1, 2, 3, maybe more enemies are going to act for you instead of against you on the next turn can be really nice. The problem comes from if you're able to kind of manipulate the battlefield to ensure that you're getting the same level of effectiveness from using the enemy to kill your enemy as you would if you were just outright doing AoE and using sync attacks to clear the enemy board in general. And that's been the biggest issue that I've run into with Trevor. There's been so many times where I just wished that I had Eri or Ralf or Tarma to do a bunch of AoE damage and just clear enemies so I don't have to worry about them anymore. That said, there's also been plenty of times where being able to manipulate the way that my enemies move and being able to quickly dash across the battlefield to deal with priority targets has been very impactful. So, much like Tarma, I think Trevor has his use cases, but when I'm looking for a just kind of general run, either because I'm increasing difficulty level or going for certain side bosses or whatever, Trevor tends to be one of the characters that I reach for the least. Again, he's not bad, but he doesn't have the oomph that I wish that he had. And with that, I think I'm feeling pretty confident about this tier list. I know that Theo and Ralf are absolutely the top of the tier for me. They just are always the characters that whoop the most ass. And then having Eri and Leona as the follow-up for the adaptable tier also feels really good. They're characters that tend to have a few more niche cases where they're not always the best, where they tend to be a little limited, partially due to the way that their skills work, partially due to the weapon loadouts that they have. But overall, those four are definitely the characters that I tend to add the most often. Then having Marco and Clark in baseline feels pretty good because they're the most supporty characters, and being the supporty characters, they definitely care more about the terrain that you're dealing with and what other party members you have, so that can really have a major impact on how effective they are. And then your corner cases and your desynced characters are really very focused, and again, like, you can find a point where they are extremely strong, but those tend to be the corner cases where they're going to be the most functional, and then outside of that, not as much. Now, of course, that said, I do invite you to disagree with me, debate with me, discuss in the comments. That's always good. There's plenty more time that I'm going to be spending with Metal Slug Tactics, and I'm sure there's many of you out there who have spent more time than me with the game. So if you have examples or you just generally disagree with the way a character behaves, let me know all that in the comments, because I'll learn something and other people will also learn something, which will be nice. Thank you to all of my direct channel supporters as well. You've been seeing them scroll by over my face on the right side of the screen from, well, where you're looking, but actually, I guess, yeah, no, it would be the right side of the screen. Absolutely. And I'm planning on a decent amount of Metal Slug Tactics content going forward. I want to make dedicated character guides for all these characters. I have another potential tips video that I'm looking at putting together. I've been really enjoying my time with the game. I really didn't expect to love it as much as I do, but every day when I'm off of my day job or I'm done with channel things that I have to do, I have some free time to myself, I always kind of find my eyes drifting to the Metal Slug Tactics option on my Steam list. So that tells you a lot about how good it is. With all that said, though, I'm going to wrap this one up here. My name has been Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman. Apologies for the overall blue lighting. I promise I'm going to continue to work on my studio setup as things go forward. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you all have a good night. Stay safe and healthy out there. And remember, be good to each other. Bye now.